Right now, Erdogan is doing this for Ukraine. The end of the war could come soon. An urgent decision from Turkey. Russia has been put in its place. Once again, Ankara is putting pressure on the bunker dwellers so much that the whole world is waiting for a historic turning point in the situation with Ukraine. Erdogan may be able to move the stone from its dead point while the Kremlin nervously keeps an eye on the clock. A historic turning point is on the horizon. Urgent, a record-breaking attack in the Air Force has been unleashed. All of Russia's air defenses. The Ukrainian army is delivering devastating blows to Russian defenses. Air defense is destroyed, the army is blind, infrastructure is in flames. No one expected this. Ukrainians managed to break through the defenses with this powerful salvo. This is just the beginning. It will only get scarier from here. The Air Force is breaking through the front. Putin's army is in fiery chaos. Russia is in panic. Putin's army's front lines are in ruins. The command is paralyzed. The generals are drowning in fear. Russia is on fire again. Military and energy facilities are ablaze. And all this is thanks to new Ukrainian missiles and drones. Secret developments are no longer a secret. Don't miss how Ukrainian weapons are turning enemy targets to ashes. We'll tell you about this in just a minute. Urgent. Not a single Russian strike on Ukraine will go unanswered. A tough decision by the Ukrainian military regarding the Russians. The Air Force's revenge is precise and deadly. Shutdown in the USA. That's all. Trump has signed the law, which means new arms supplies to Ukraine can go full force. Will this change the course of the war with Russia? All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. Istanbul is once again sending Putin an ultimatum. Talks between Russia and Ukraine have shot to the top of global media coverage. Turkey has suddenly started talking about the urgent need for dialogue. And when Ankara, which has serious leverage over the Kremlin dictator, says this, the whole world holds its breath, waiting for a turning point. Erdogan's role is becoming crucial. He is the one who can push Putin toward dialogue, which Putin constantly tries to avoid. Will a historic shift begin? Find out more in the following report.
Recep Erdogan will once again bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. According to Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, negotiations between the warring sides are inevitable, and the only place acceptable to both countries is Istanbul. I think this war is now going through its worst phase because both sides are focused on destroying transport and energy infrastructure. Now it has turned into a drone war. No one can move anywhere. Only those who disregard losses are advancing. In addition, Vladimir Zelensky announced his intention to resume the negotiation process with the Russians in his address. We
are working to initiate another round of negotiations so that there is at least some prospect of ending this war. And we are also counting on the resumption of exchanges. There are many meetings, negotiations, and phone calls. Right now, all of this is for that purpose.
The first positive step toward possible negotiations was the agreement brokered by Turkey and the UAE on a large-scale prisoner exchange. According to the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, this concerns the release of 1,200 Ukrainians. Donald Trump is also counting on a swift end to the war. The US president believes that the sanctions imposed on Russian oil companies will motivate the aggressor to make concessions. I hope this will happen soon. There is enormous pressure being put on India because it is buying Russian oil. And thanks to this, they have money for the war. That's why I think this will end soon. During the negotiations in Istanbul in the spring and summer of 2025, Moscow did not change its previous unrealistic demands on Kyiv, including the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine.
They are well aware of our position. As I have already mentioned before, they currently have our exact position in writing. As it has been clearly stated, there is absolutely nothing secret or hidden about it at all. It was stated by President Putin in June 2024 when he spoke at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Moscow's intentions can only be judged by its actions, and it has made it clear what it wants. It wants the rest of Donetsk region, and obviously Ukraine will not agree to this. Right now, we see that Russia continues to carry out long-range strikes on Ukrainian territory, obviously aiming to destroy its energy system and, so to speak, demoralize the country. On the one hand, the Kremlin does not want to stop the fighting for negotiations. On the other hand, Russia is increasingly pressured by newly imposed sanctions against oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, Ukrainian drone and missile strikes on refineries and ports, as well as Putin's reluctance to lose dialogue with Trump.
The Russians are now trying to somehow break up this diplomatic ice, to shatter it in various ways. and let's say through both formal and informal diplomacy. They are currently working through the G7. Through communication channels, they most likely tried to resume once again the Istanbul negotiation process. But in any case, the Russians are not ready to accept Trump's ultimatum. And Trump's ultimatum is very simple. Any political negotiations will only begin when the fighting stops.
At the same time, in reality, specifically on the battlefield, the Russian occupiers are only increasing the intensity and scale of their assault operations. They continue to advance in the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia directions.
Russia's air defense is in a fiery knockout. Ukrainian forces managed to deliver a devastating blow to the very heart of Russia's defenses. Key elements of the air defense have simply been wiped out, and Putin's army is now almost blind. We will show you the most powerful attacks on the Kremlin's military and fuel infrastructure. These strikes are redrawing the map of Russian security and calling into question the real combat readiness of the world's second largest army. Don't miss it.
First of all, at least 4 were destroyed, and secondly, 2 more radars were eliminated. And that's not counting the fact that a dozen such systems may have been damaged.
New details, new conclusions. It turns out that the strike on Novorossiysk on the night of November 14th not only marked the collapse of Russian oil supplies, but also became the most powerful blow to Russian air defense systems during the entire war.
Ukraine carried out one of the most devastating strikes against Russian air defenses. It destroyed 4 S-400 launchers and 2 radar stations from this battery at once.
Ukrainian media reported this yesterday, citing sources in the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU. It became known that 4 S-400 Triumph launchers were completely destroyed. They were located on the territory of the Kuban Red Banner Regiment's military unit. In total, there were 12 such launchers at the site. The security service believes that some of the others were also partially hit. As a result, the entire division has been put out of action.
If anything is overlooked in this regard, then at the moment when these launchers need to operate, an emergency situation could occur, which could again lead to the detonation of the launcher or cause the missile to fly off course. In short, to summarize the situation, there could potentially be a wide variety of different consequences or outcomes in this particular case, if some seemingly minor or insignificant issue, detail or aspect is overlooked or not properly addressed. So basically, at this point in time, the entire base as it currently stands can essentially be written off or considered lost.
At the same time, 2 expensive radars from these long-range air threat detection systems were destroyed, as well as the target acquisition radar, which was actually guiding those very S-400. But even multi-million-dollar losses aren't the main issue here. What's more important is that right now, the Russians simply have nothing to replace the lost equipment with.
Well, while it's still somehow possible to replace the launchers, it's extremely difficult to replace the radars, as you know. Because each radar is a high-tech instrument, and under sanctions, it's very hard, time-consuming and expensive to assemble one. Here, there were 2 radars at once, and both were operating as part of a specific battery. In other words, the battery has fallen apart. Now it needs to find a new radar, that is, its eyes, without which air defense is useless.
What exactly our defense forces used to strike Novorossiysk still remains unclear. Most likely it was the SBU operating drones. However, several Ukrainian special services were involved in the attack at once. So analysts agree that the strike was a combined one.
You just need to make a wish at night. Maybe that was the wish for Novorossiysk. You see, wishes have a way of coming true. So that's the kind of menu the defense forces offer. It's always a pleasure. But seriously, if we're talking about the systematic nature of such strikes, it's so systematic that they hit 2 or 3 times.
It should also be noted that the destruction of military equipment and port infrastructure in Novorossiysk is just the pinnacle of all the operations that were carefully prepared and along the way destroyed.
There are many additional items, people, or possibilities beyond those already mentioned. This means that the list is not limited to what has been stated so far. There are numerous other options, examples, or elements that could also be included, far more than can be easily counted or described here. Russian targets, specifically those associated with or belonging to Russia, are being discussed. For our drone operators to reach Novorossiysk. This is a very high-value target.
At the same time, the very same sources within the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, additionally add that, while an entire air defense division stationed in the city of Novorossiysk has been completely put out of action, there is now a significant and substantial gap in Russian defensive positions, which Ukrainian drones as well as missiles will undoubtedly and inevitably exploit. Putin's army
is collapsing into a blazing abyss. The AFU have broken through Russian defenses, as if they never existed at all. The key stronghold line has simply vanished. The front is torn apart, the command is paralyzed, and the generals are drowning in panic. Meanwhile, the dictator sits in his Kremlin bunker raving about mythical victories. At the same time, FPV drones of the AFU are blowing up the enemy's strategic military targets, scattering the occupiers and turning them to ashes in seconds. It will only get tougher from here. Russia is in a state of total collapse.
Pokrovsk is on the brink. It seems that soon the AFU may have to retreat and abandon the ruined city. Such grim forecasts are being made more and more often by Western military analysts. The command of the AFU also acknowledges the full complexity of the situation on this section of the front. However, for now, there is no talk of surrendering the city. Our fighters continue to methodically drive out the occupiers entrenched in residential buildings. There, the enemy is desperately trying to set up strong points.
The situation in the city itself is difficult. There are ongoing shifting battles. Accordingly, we are clearing out individual houses and specific streets. In certain situations, especially special forces, the enemy infiltrates specific areas and sets up ambushes, and accordingly tries to adjust their fire. Both drones and artillery are being used against our positions, but now we have already learned the enemy's tactics in the city. So here, accordingly, we are localizing all these points.
The fighting inside the city is for every block, every house, and even individual entrances. Neither side has full control over Pokrovsk. Nevertheless, the Russian army is disregarding its losses and is desperately trying to storm the Ukrainian city.
The enemy has repeatedly tried to enter from the north. We have reinforced our strike positions there, as well as on the flanks. They tried several directions from the south. We have activated both sabotage groups and even the movement of armored vehicles. We have also carried out counter-terrorist operations against the groups and struck the equipment with firepower.
The occupiers' losses near Pokrovsk are so enormous that Russian contract soldiers are massively refusing to take part in local assaults and are simply fleeing their positions. The Russians no longer retrieve their wounded and dead from the streets, and their evacuation teams, they are converting them into assault units. This state of affairs does not make the occupiers any braver. According to our partisans, the latter are almost leaving in entire groups without permission, deliberately destroying their own equipment beforehand.
Agents report the disappearance or desertion of several of their fellow servicemen after a series of targeted strikes by Ukrainian defense forces on Russian troop positions on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Command posts, equipment parking areas, and UAV units were hit. Some Russian servicemen link the desertion of Russian soldiers and the strikes on the Russian armed forces positions to each other. Some believe that these servicemen were directly involved in this.
Those few desperate ones who foolishly decide to stay at their positions near Pokrovsk face a slow and agonizing death by starvation. And all this is because the defense forces have completely cut off the main logistics route for delivering supplies and ammunition to the occupiers. At least 2 airstrikes were carried out on the road that the Russians had managed to use to bring some light equipment into the city, after which the enemy was left without a supply route. Now the occupiers can only reach their positions on foot, and even then only a handful managed to do so thanks to the heavy fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. Recently, Russian soldiers have resorted to all sorts of tricks just to avoid being spotted by Ukrainian drones. One of the Kremlin's latest so-called analogs to nothing inventions are these kinds of armored shells. Our defenders have already nicknamed them tin cans. They don't make the occupiers any less visible, but they do get opened up by FPV drones just like actual cans. No matter what corner the occupier tries to hide in, our drone operators will fish him out even from there. A vivid example of this is right now on your screens. The concrete pipe from Snopsen which the Russian soldier used for cover did not save the occupier. Credit must be given to the Ukrainian pilots. Each time, they manage to penetrate even the most heavily fortified enemy positions and accurately strike enemy equipment. It has reached the point where our FPV drones are flying right into Russian shelters. When an FPV drone flies into a dugout or an ammo depot, the occupiers simply have no chance of survival. And the best proof of this is the latest statistics from the armed forces of Ukraine. In the past 24 hours, the aggressor country's army has lost about 1,000 soldiers. The total losses of the occupiers since the start of the full-scale war have surpassed 1,158,000 people. The armed forces of Ukraine have already destroyed 11,350 Kremlin tanks, more than 23,500 armored fighting vehicles, and nearly 30,000 Stalker, 5,000 artillery systems, and 1,541 multiple launch rocket systems.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Once again, military and energy facilities in Russia are ablaze, and now the Ukrainian armed forces are doing this mostly with Ukrainian-made weapons. Watch right now to learn about the newest and most effective Ukrainian missiles and drones.
Self-propelled artillery, mortars, drones, electronic warfare, shells, ammunition, communication systems, air defense, missiles. Ukraine is actively ramping up the production of its own military equipment and ammunition. Production is becoming increasingly precise, large-scale, and technologically advanced.
During this war, Ukraine has already reached the point where almost 60% of the weapons we have, the weapons our soldiers use, are Ukrainian-made. And these are powerful weapons with many cutting-edge features.
This is no longer just a local industry. Ukraine is building its own military technological shield, a network of production lines, testing grounds, and combat units that turn ideas into weaponry. And our specialists immediately test them in real-world conditions.
The Ukrainian side is specifically scaling up strike capabilities with a range of over 1,000 kilometers.
Let's start with drones, the small but decisive technology that overnight changed the rules of war. The FP family of strike platforms and other Ukrainian models are produced according to the principles of speed, low cost, and efficiency. Their advantages are simple design, fast production, and tactical relevance. They make it possible to carry out precision strikes, disrupt enemy logistics, and keep enemy positions under pressure far from the front line.
In 2024, about 1 million units were contracted, and by 2025, production had increased to 30,000 FPV drones per month. It should be noted that this quantity, that is the annual production of about 4 million FPV drones, is a record figure, even taking into account the capabilities of the military-industrial complexes of all NATO countries combined. In other words, at this moment, the Ukrainian defense industry is producing an exceptionally high and truly unprecedented number of unmanned aerial vehicles. For comparison, the United States Army adds approximately up to 100,000 unmanned aerial vehicles to its arsenal each year. Once again, I want to emphasize that the Ukrainian defense industry produces up to 4 million drones.
The technological production formula is simple: composite fuselages, 3D printed wings, inexpensive components, and open-source navigation solutions. All this makes it possible to produce functional platforms in batches. But you can't cut costs on electronics. Navigation and guidance systems make the drones resistant to Russian electronic warfare. Otherwise, mass waves of launches won't break through the enemy's dense defenses. In parallel with drones, a strategic direction is also developing. Here, the key players are missiles and missile systems, which strike at the enemy's rear, depriving them of fuel, depots, and command centers. Neptune is a domestically produced coastal anti-ship missile system that has strengthened the security of maritime borders and given Kiev tools to impact the enemy's logistics in the Black Sea.
There is an unprecedented case in world history. The point is that Ukraine, as a country that effectively does not possess a navy, inflicted severe damage on the Russian Federation by destroying up to 35% of the Black Sea Fleet's vessels at one point. According to the British side, the naval activity of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea Basin has dropped to a historic low as a result of the use of strike drones and, accordingly, naval drones.
Another important milestone is the FPV-5 Flamingo cruise missile. This is a fully Ukrainian development with a declared range of up to 3,000 kilometers.
For comparison, the legendary American Tomahawk has a strike range of 1,600 kilometers. The Tomahawk's warhead is about 500 kilograms. The Flamingo's warhead is about 1,150 kilograms. The latest documented use of the Flamingo, an unmanned aerial vehicle, was a strike that targeted the oil terminal in the Russian port city of Tuapse. This incident highlighted the ongoing operational use of the Flamingo drone in modern conflicts. Moreover, Russian public channels themselves confirmed that the Ukrainian side used these strike systems.
By combining small drones and large cruise missiles, Ukraine gains both mass and strategy. Drones keep the enemy on edge, missiles strike critical targets, and together this seriously undermines the enemy's ability to wage a prolonged war. But the Ukrainian defense industry is not just about small and large systems, but also time-tested developments like the Bodana, Stugna, and other artillery and anti-tank systems, which provide mobility, fire resilience, and operate within a unified strike network. Drone reconnaissance, artillery adjustment, precision missile strike. And so the cycle repeats.
40% of the Russian budget depends on revenue from the sale of oil and petroleum products. And accordingly, taking into account this budget-forming sector of the occupying country, adjustments are made to the actions of the Ukrainian side, specifically the use of strike drones and means of destruction, namely the Flamingo and Neptune, at the moment of neutralizing the oil refining complex of the Russian Federation. According to the Russian side's assessment, the losses resulting from the Ukrainian strike on the oil refining complex of the Russian Federation are estimated at around $100 billion.
Ukraine's production capabilities are already extending beyond its borders. Through agreements and joint projects, Ukrainian companies are legalizing assembly and serial production in European countries. If before the start of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian defense industry was not lagging behind, then by 2024 production volumes reached about $9 billion, and in 2025 they grew to $35 billion. Plans for 2026 include scaling up to $60 billion, and this is only the beginning. Not a single act of Russian terror against Ukraine will go unanswered. Ukrainian missiles and drones have reduced to ashes not only the Novorossiysk oil export terminal and the Saratov oil refinery. Other important military facilities have been consumed by the hellfire of retribution. And while Russian monsters kill peaceful Ukrainians, the armed forces of Ukraine systematically destroy the oil infrastructure of the aggressor country.
From the promise to take Kyiv in 3 days to total blackouts and the imposition of a state of emergency now within Russia itself.
We're bored. It's stagnation. We want some action.
Thanks to the bunker dwellers and Ukrainian drones in some regions of Russia, as Putin would say, things are really heating up. For example, last night in the Krasnodar region, the distinctive sounds of incoming strikes, air raid sirens and explosions were heard in Henichesk, Anapa and Novorossiysk. As a result, in Novorossiysk alone, a nighttime attack damaged an oil depot at the Sheskaris transshipment complex, one of Russia's largest oil terminals, through which a significant portion of Putin's oil exports pass. Local officials also reported that part of the coastal facilities was destroyed. In addition, debris from already downed drones damaged a storage tank and a pier belonging to Chernomor Transneft. This latter incident effectively halted the pumping of black gold to the port of Novorossiysk. A state of emergency has been declared in the city itself.
This is a disaster.
It would later turn out that the state of emergency in the city was not introduced for the safety of citizens, but to cover up the aftermath of the strikes. After all, not only the Russian oil facilities were hit, but also the local military base was destroyed. On its territory there was an air defense unit, at least one S-400 system, and an ammunition depot. One of the eyewitness videos captured the moment the Russian ammunition depot was hit.
I've never seen anything like this before. Afterburner at the oil depot.
After the footage was published, Russian Z military bloggers were quick to point out that a Ukrainian drone couldn't have reached the target that fast. But a missile could have. The worst fears of the Kremlin were soon confirmed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Last night, our soldiers successfully used long-range Neptunes against specific targets on Russian territory. This is our entirely justified response to the ongoing Russian terror. Ukrainian missiles are now delivering more significant and precise results almost every month.
And although Zelensky did not specify in his address which exact targets the Ukrainian armed forces struck, experts have virtually no doubts. So based on official sources,
according to official sources that publish videos and generally provide officially verified information, there is reason to believe that this type of Ukrainian weaponry is starting to appear in greater numbers and is being used more extensively against the Russian Federation.
As a result, Ukrainian attacks are becoming much larger in scale time after time. So, in addition to Novorossiysk, the Ukrainian armed forces once again targeted the Saratov oil refinery last night. A week earlier, Ukrainian drones had already struck the oil refinery. At that time, the facility had to be temporarily shut down. Now hopefully the refinery will be shut down for good. Far too great.
There are still far too many military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation that need to be taken out. And the lights in Moscow will almost automatically go out once certain facilities in Russia are shut down. We won't even have to try that hard for the Ilyich's light bulb to go out in Russia. That will definitely happen.
Ilyich, that will be inevitable. But for now, the Russian eagle is plunging into complete darkness.
Is it still flying? I don't know. Fly! I'm scared as hell to hit it. It's all good. Is this already the third one?
Yeah. Hold on, wait. So basically they're launching missiles from our runway, looks like.
There it is.
The local residents still can't recover from the recent raid by Ukrainian drones. I don't know if it was the right thing to do or not, but I went outside. And out there basically everything was on fire.
Basically, in essence.
And all this despite the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces, unlike the Russian army, strike exclusively at legitimate targets, military facilities of the Kremlin. And as for what will happen when Ukrainian Flamingos and long-range Neptunes start actively joining the attacks, we'll be able to see that for ourselves in the coming months. After all, according to experts, serial production of Ukraine's newest weapons has already begun, which means things are only going to get worse from here, at least for Russia's military-industrial complex and oil industry.
This is quite a diverse range, which makes it possible to destroy, strike and eliminate targets en masse on the territory of the Russian Federation, even at significant distances from the borders or the line of contact. In fact, this is a rather serious and very positive indicator that step by step and in a systematic way, we are carefully taking out key targets on Russian territory and destroying, among other things, important military production.
The longest shutdown in history has ended in the United States. Trump signed the corresponding law. Can we now hope that US weapons will be supplied to Ukraine in full? And in general, what does the end of the shutdown mean in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war? More on this coming up. Don't miss it.
You can't run a country like this, Trump said, and ended the shutdown. The President of the United States apparently likes to break his own records. The budget pause lasted 43 days, which is 8 days longer than the previous pause under Trump.
And now it is an honor for us to sign this incredible bill and get our country working again. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The shutdown had consequences not only for Americans, but also for countries dependent on Washington, including Ukraine.
This is overall a very grave and extremely serious sign, or a symptom of a deep crisis within the political system of the United States itself. In today's world, where quick response and effective work are essential, this is an unaffordable luxury. So yes, on the one hand, the processes have been unblocked, but this is only a postponement of the deadline.
While the US government was at a standstill, $5 billion worth of arms exports also froze. This aid was intended for NATO allies, including Ukraine.
The processes for supplying weapons to Ukraine were under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. And the Pentagon, as I mentioned earlier, was not shut down even during the government shutdown. Yes, there was certainly a particular noticeable imbalance and some miscommunication, mainly because several government employees were directly affected by the shutdown. For example, this included those working in the Oval Office and some individuals in related ministries. So, in this case, the logistics of making bureaucratic decisions were indeed, well, partially disrupted.
Now that the shutdown is over, the blocked arms supply contracts are coming back into effect. But the question is how quickly all of this will actually start working again.
At the same time, the processes have been unblocked, and now the bureaucratic and procedural aspects will, of course, be implemented in a much more dynamic and efficient manner than before. But does this necessarily mean that Ukraine will actually receive the necessary weapons more quickly? It's hard to say. Here, we really need to rely more on the official position of our delegations in the United States.
The unfreezing of American contracts has also become an important signal for NATO allies.
Of course, all NATO countries look to the key NATO country, the United States of America, because all processes are tied specifically to this country. The military-industrial complex, coordination of military contingents, military training, in short, absolutely everything is focused on the United States. And when the United States, say for about 2 months or so, or something close to that, ends up in a kind of limbo, well, of course, yes, this has a certain negative effect on NATO as a whole.
But in the Kremlin, they surely understand that the end of the shutdown is not in their interest at all.
When the United States is destabilized from within by processes like a shutdown, of course, the Russian Federation will only add fuel to the fire. That's obvious. So they will spread disinformation and do whatever it takes to prolong this process until the states stabilize, remember about the Russians, and are able to act in a consolidated way. For example, by strengthening the sanctions package or even preparing the next one.
But what's interesting is that temporary funding for the US has been extended until January 30th, although the issue that caused the shutdown in Congress still hasn't been resolved.
On the one hand, the processes have been unblocked, but it's only a postponement of the deadline. As for the Democrats' healthcare reform, the one the Democrats are talking about extending, well, Obama's, yes, they're supposed to return to it in December, at the end of December. So yes, the processes have been unblocked, but they could now also lead to other budgetary consequences.
According to economists' estimates, the daily losses from the shutdown for the American economy amounted to about $15 billion.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.